on Russia, this is a terribly sad thing for me, because I spent a lot of time in the 80s and early 90s on Russia. I'd go there every year. I'd spend weeks there. I traveled all over. I got to know most of the people who ran the government and who are now there. And I think that right now we're confronted with something that potentially could have been avoided. And the fundamental blunder that the United States made in the mid-'80s, late '80s, early '90s, was the expansion of NATO. I mean, here we'd won the Cold War. We'd won the Cold War. And you then had people saying, well, now what are we going to do with NATO? Oh, well, I don't know. It's a bureaucracy. It works. What are we going to do with it? And so then the idea of expanding NATO. And the problem with it is this. During the negotiation for the reunification of Germany, Gorbachev and Jim Baker says to Gorbachev, you know, in the treaty it says, you know, no NATO troops in what was then East Germany. In the discussions, and I had this conversation with Gorbachev last summer, he told me very directly, the conversation with Jim Baker, the question was, Baker saying, NATO, if you agree to reunification of Germany in NATO, NATO will not expand 1 inch further east, which is what I went to see Gorbachev to confirm, because I care so much about this. Is this true? Now, the interpretation on the American side, Scowcroft says, well, he misinterpreted. Baker, I haven't quite pinned down. But Gorbachev says very specifically, he said, if you expand 1 inch further, if you allow reunification, Germany and NATO, NATO will not expand 1 inch further east. And then Gorbachev told me, Kohl told him the same thing, which was new information, right? So the first Bush keeps his promise. You assume it's a promise. They talk about partnership for peace, and you know, Russians kind of like that idea. And then Clinton comes in. What's the early thing he does in his first term? He expands NATO. Why expand NATO? And I read, and I've been rereading because I've been thinking of writing something about this, Strobe Talbot's article in Foreign Affairs about why expand NATO, and you read it and you say, huh, that's a reason? You know? And last summer again, I'm talking to a number of people that I've known for many years, 2 guys who ran for president in Russia in 1996 and 2000. And you know, one of them says to me, I'm out campaigning in the Urals. Somebody comes up to me and says, this is 96. Why are the Americans expanding NATO? Isn't that a military alliance? And they said, well, yeah, but it's a military alliance. And the guy said, the politician said, Russians might not be able to understand puts and calls, but they certainly understand tanks, right? And think of it this way. What would any politics 101, somebody who's a friend, supporter, goes bankrupt, what do? You call them up on the phone and say, you know, Joe, it's tough. I know things are going to be okay. You're going to be back. You know, you show them some respect. And what did we do? We kicked them when they were down. We expanded NATO. And in expanding NATO, created the issue that allows the authoritarianism that has returned to say it was justified. And I think that it was a blunder of monumental proportions. When I was at Oxford, I spent a lot of time on the origins of the Cold War. And, you know, I read all these documents, and, I mean, all of the documents. And it's, you know, the Russians were responsible, basically, you know. Here, it's unfortunate. It's a blunder of vision. And in the best of circumstances, it was bureaucratic inertia in NATO that people had to have a job in the worst of circumstances, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy with certain people in the Clinton administration who were irredentist, East European types, who believe Russia will forever be the enemy, and therefore we got to protect against the time where they might once again be aggressive, thereby creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, what do you do with it now? Still talk. But if we had done that, and if we'd really done a strategic partnership, talking about common threats over the long term and what we can do together, because we knew ultimately Russia would be back. I mean, they did have oil even then. You know, imagine how Iran would be different today. Imagine how Central Asia would be different, you know. So you've got me at a kind of moment where my feelings about the Russian thing are extremely sad, because I think that we've created a problem that could have been easily avoided, and we've lost a partner that could have been enormously important over the long term, and in particular, you know, with regard to the issues that most threaten us today.